The motion sensor alert on my phone buzzed at 6:43 a.m., showing a woman in designer hiking boots sneaking through my pasture with a professional camera, photographing my cattle like she was documenting some kind of crime scene. I recognized Karen Mitchell immediately, our HOA president, with a God complex and a grudge against anyone who didn't bow to her suburban vision of rural perfection. What she didn't know was that I owned the most prominent billboard in 3 counties, and I was about to give her the kind of exposure she'd never forget. Let me take you back to where this all started, on my 120-acre ranch in Willowbrook Valley, Colorado. I'm Marcus Thompson, third-generation cattle rancher, and for 32 years, my family's Angus cattle have grazed these rolling hills that stretch from the creek bottom all the way up to the pine-covered ridges. The ranch sits right at the edge of what used to be pure cattle country, before the developers discovered our valley and decided it needed a touch of suburban paradise. That paradise came in the form of Willowbrook Estates, a gated community of million-dollar homes with names like Aspen Vista and Mountain Majesty, complete with manicured lawns that probably used more water in a month than my cattle drank in a year. The subdivision butted right up against my property line, separated only by a decorative split-rail fence that looked pretty but wouldn't stop a determined house cat, let alone a 1,500-pound bull. The morning air was crisp, with the promise of autumn, carrying the familiar scents of sage and cattle, when I first met Karen Mitchell. I was checking water troughs in my east pasture, the one closest to the subdivision, when I heard the distinctive click of expensive heels on gravel. Through the morning mist, I saw her approaching my fence line, a woman in her 40s with honey blonde highlights and the kind of athletic wear that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. "Excuse me?" she called out, waving a manicured hand. "Are you the property owner here?" I walked over, my boots squelching in the soft ground where my cattle had worn paths to the water. My border collie, Duke, trotted beside me, already sensing something off about this perfectly put-together woman standing at our fence. "Marcus Thompson," I said, extending a work-roughened hand over the fence. "What can I do for you?" She looked at my hand for a moment before giving it a brief, reluctant shake. "Karen Mitchell. I'm the president of the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association." She gestured toward the subdivision behind her, where house after identical house marched up the hillside like expensive dominoes. "We need to discuss some concerns about your operation here." The way she said operation made it sound like I was running some kind of illegal enterprise instead of the same family ranch that had been here since before she was born. "What kind of concerns?" She pulled out her phone and started showing me pictures of my cattle near the fence line. Pictures of the muddy areas around the water troughs, pictures of cow pies in my pasture. "Our residents are experiencing significant quality of life impacts from your cattle. The odor, the noise, the unsightliness of it all." I looked at the photos, then at my cattle peacefully grazing in the distance, then back at Karen. "Ma'am, those are pictures of cattle doing what cattle do. On my property, behind my fence." Her smile was as sharp as a paper cut. "Well, that's where it gets complicated. You see, several of our property owners are claiming that the essence of your operation is affecting their property values. Smells don't respect property lines, Mr. Thompson. The smells of a working ranch that's been here for 3 generations? The smells that our residents didn't expect when they purchased homes in a premium residential community." She tucked her phone away with theatrical precision. "We're not unreasonable people, Mr. Thompson. We understand you have historical rights to operate here. But surely there's a way we can coexist more harmoniously." The morning sun was climbing higher, burning off the mist, and revealing the full scope of Karen's suburban kingdom spread out behind her. Every lawn was perfect, every driveway spotless, every house painted in approved earth tones that probably had names like Sage Whisper and Canyon Dreams. What exactly are you suggesting? Well, we've researched some options. There are excellent facilities for relocating cattle operations to less residential areas. The county has programs to help with the transition. We'd be happy to provide information about alternative locations that might be more suitable. I felt my jaw clench. You want me to move my ranch? We want to find a solution that works for everyone. Your cattle would be happier in a more rural setting, and our residents could enjoy the peaceful mountain lifestyle they invested in. A meadowlark called from somewhere in my pasture, its song cutting through the tension like a knife. Duke pressed against my leg, sensing my rising anger. Mrs. Mitchell, my family has been ranching this land since 1891. We were here before there was a road up this valley, before there was electricity or running water, certainly before there were million-dollar houses with names like Aspen Vista. And we respect that history, she said, her tone suggesting she respected it about as much as she'd respect a pile of fresh manure. But times change. Neighborhoods evolve. Sometimes we have to make difficult decisions for the greater good. Whose greater good? The communities. The 37 families who've invested their life savings in homes here, only to discover that their property values are being impacted by industrial agricultural activities. Industrial agricultural activities. That was a new one, even for someone who'd heard every complaint city folks could dream up about ranch life. Mrs. Mitchell, I appreciate you coming to talk to me directly. But I'm not relocating my cattle, and I'm not changing how I operate my ranch to accommodate people who chose to move next to an active cattle operation. Her mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and calculating underneath. I hope we can work something out, Mr. Thompson. It would be such a shame if this became adversarial. As she walked back toward her subdivision, her heels clicking on the gravel road like a countdown timer, I should have realized that conversation was just her opening move. What I didn't know was that she'd already filed a complaint with the county about alleged health code violations on my property. The county inspector showed up 3 days later, on a Thursday morning, when the air was thick with the scent of approaching rain. I was in the barn, checking on a cow that was due to calve any day, when I heard the distinctive rumble of a government vehicle pulling into my yard. Tom Bradley climbed out of his white pickup truck, clipboard in hand, and a look of weary resignation on his weathered face. Tom had been the county's agricultural inspector for 15 years, and he'd been to my ranch enough times to know that I ran a clean, well-managed operation. Morning, Marcus. Sorry to bother you, but I've got to follow up on a complaint. What kind of complaint? He consulted his clipboard with the expression of a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Someone called in claiming you've got improper waste management, potential groundwater contamination, and, let me see here, unsanitary conditions that pose a public health risk. I almost laughed. Tom, you've inspected this place a dozen times over the years. Have you ever found anything that even came close to a health code violation? Not even once. Your operation is cleaner than most commercial dairies I inspect. He tucked his clipboard under his arm and pulled on latex gloves. But I still have to do a full inspection. You know how it works. We spent the next 2 hours walking every acre of my property, with Tom documenting water sources, manure management, feed storage, and cattle health. He took photos, collected water samples, and measured distances between various facilities and the property line. The whole time, I could see Karen's house perched on the hillside above us, her expansive deck offering a commanding view of my ranch. At one point, I noticed sunlight glinting off what might have been binoculars or a camera lens. Tom, can I ask who filed this complaint? He glanced toward the subdivision, then back at his paperwork. You know, I can't tell you that, Marcus. But I will say, This whoever it was seemed to have very detailed knowledge of county health codes. They knew exactly what violations to claim and how to phrase them to trigger a mandatory inspection. Someone did their homework. Someone sure did. He sealed the last water sample and made some final notes. Marcus, I'll have my lab results back in a week, but I can tell you right now that this is going to come back clean. Your operation meets or exceeds every standard we have. As Tom packed up his testing equipment, the first drops of rain began to fall, creating little puffs of dust in my driveway. The smell of approaching storm mixed with the familiar ranch scents of hay, cattle, and honest work. But here's the thing, Tom continued, loading his samples into a cooler. False complaints like this one tie up county resources and cost taxpayers money. If someone keeps filing bogus reports, we start looking at harassment charges. I'll keep that in mind. After Tom left, I stood in my doorway, watching the rain sweep across the valley in gray sheets. The storm was coming from the west, the same direction as Willowbrook Estates, and I couldn't help thinking it was some kind of metaphor for what was heading my way. That evening, as the rain drummed against my windows, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Hope your inspection went well today. Looking forward to working together on a solution that benefits everyone. K.M. Karen Mitchell had somehow gotten my cell phone number and felt comfortable enough to text me about an inspection she'd orchestrated. The woman's audacity was breathtaking. But what I didn't know was that while Tom was collecting his water samples, Karen was collecting something else: detailed photographs of every aspect of my operation, taken from multiple angles with a telephoto lens. She was building a case, and my cattle were about to become unwitting evidence in whatever legal strategy she was cooking up. The photos appeared on the Willowbrook Estates community Facebook page the following Tuesday, posted at 6:00 a.m. with the caption, "Is this the rural lifestyle our families deserve?" Karen had created what looked like a professional photo essay documenting every aspect of my ranch that could possibly be construed as unsightly or problematic. There were close-ups of muddy cattle paths, artistic shots of cow pies scattered across the pasture, telephoto images of my bulls looking particularly intimidating as they grazed near the fence line. She'd even managed to capture a photo of one of my cows relieving herself, timed perfectly to make it look like some kind of environmental disaster in progress. The post had 37 comments within an hour, ranging from concerned neighbors worried about property values to outraged parents claiming my cattle posed a danger to their children. Karen had orchestrated a social media campaign designed to turn the entire subdivision against me. I was reading through the comments on my phone, my morning coffee growing cold in my hand, when Duke started barking. Through my kitchen window, I could see a small crowd gathered at my fence line, half a dozen residents from Willowbrook Estates, all holding phones and taking pictures of my cattle like they were documenting evidence for a court case. I walked outside, the morning air crisp enough to make my breath visible, and approached the group. They scattered like startled deer, all except for one middle-aged man in expensive jogging clothes who seemed determined to stand his ground. "Can I help you folks with something?" The jogger stepped forward, puffing out his chest like a bantam rooster. "I'm Brad Henley, Willowbrook Estates Architectural Committee. We're conducting a visual assessment of how your operation impacts our community's aesthetics. By standing on the county road and taking pictures of my cattle? It's a public road. We have every right to document conditions that affect our property values." More cars were pulling up now, disgorging residents with cameras and phones. Someone had even brought professional photography equipment, a woman with silver hair and yoga pants, who was adjusting the settings on what looked like a $1,000 camera lens. "Ma'am," I called to the photographer, "you mind telling me what you're planning to do with those pictures?" She looked up from her viewfinder with the expression of someone who'd been caught doing exactly what she'd hoped to get away with. just documenting the current state of the area. For community planning purposes. What kind of community planning? Brad Henley stepped between us. Mr. Thompson, we're simply gathering information about land use patterns in our area. It's all perfectly legal. That's when I noticed Karen's white Lexus pulling up behind the other cars. She climbed out, wearing what I can only describe as safari chic khaki pants, hiking boots, and a photographer's vest with multiple pockets. She was carrying her own professional camera and had the focused look of a general surveying a battlefield. "Morning, Marcus," she said, her voice carrying that false friendliness I'd learned to distrust. "Beautiful day for documenting rural life, isn't it? What's the real agenda here, Karen?" She gestured toward my pasture, where my cattle were doing what cattle do, grazing peacefully, completely oblivious to the suburban drama unfolding at their fence line. No agenda. Just concerned citizens exercising their rights to understand how industrial agricultural operations impact residential communities. There was that phrase again, industrial agricultural operations. She'd clearly focus grouped this language and trained her neighbors to use it. "You know what this is starting to look like, don't you?" I said, loud enough for the entire group to hear. "This looks like harassment." Karen's smile sharpened. "Marcus, we're standing on a public road taking pictures of things that are visible from public property. If you don't like people seeing your operation, maybe you should consider relocating it somewhere more private." The photographer with the expensive camera was now taking pictures of me, apparently thinking I wouldn't notice. When I looked directly at her, she had the grace to lower the camera and look embarrassed. "Ma'am, I'd appreciate it if you didn't photograph me without my permission." "Oh, sorry. I was just... The lighting is so nice this morning." Karen stepped closer to the fence, her camera at the ready. "You know, Marcus, we've been researching agricultural zoning laws, and we've discovered some interesting things about mixed-use developments. Did you know that when residential subdivisions are built adjacent to agricultural land, there are often restrictions on the types of agricultural activities that can continue?" My blood went cold. Zoning restrictions were one of the few things that could actually threaten my operation if they were applied retroactively. "My ranch predates your subdivision by 80 years. Grandfathered activities can sometimes be reevaluated when community standards change." She raised her camera and took several shots of my cattle through the fence, especially when those activities pose potential health or safety risks to residential areas. The morning sun was climbing higher, and I could feel sweat starting to gather under my shirt, despite the cool air. This wasn't just about aesthetics or property values anymore. Karen was researching ways to use the law itself to shut down my operation. What kind of health or safety risks? Well, there's groundwater contamination from animal waste, air quality impacts from methane emissions, the risk of disease transmission from livestock to humans, traffic safety concerns from heavy agricultural vehicles using residential roads. She lowered her camera and looked at me with the expression of a prosecutor who just outlined her case. The county takes these things very seriously when they're brought to their attention. As the crowd of amateur photographers finally dispersed, returning to their cars with memory cards full of incriminating cattle photos, I realized Karen had just escalated this from a neighborhood dispute to something that could threaten my family's livelihood. But what I didn't know was that her most brazen move was yet to come. While I was standing at my fence line defending my right to ranch my own land, Karen was already planning a trespassing expedition that would give me exactly the ammunition I needed to turn the tables on her entire campaign. The security system I'd installed after Tom Bradley's visit had 12 motion-activated cameras positioned around my property, each one capable of recording high-definition video with night vision capability. The system had cost me $3,000, But given Karen's escalating harassment campaign, it seemed like a reasonable investment in protecting myself and my operation. The cameras captured her at 6:43 a.m. on a Friday morning in late October, when the aspen trees on the hillsides had turned gold and the morning air was sharp with the promise of coming winter. The motion sensor alert buzzed on my phone while I was still in bed, and I watched in disbelief as Karen Mitchell climbed through my fence and began walking across my pasture with a professional camera. She wasn't alone. Following her was the silver-haired photographer from the road incident, along with a younger man carrying what looked like surveying equipment. All three were dressed in hiking clothes and carried expensive photography gear, moving through my property like they owned it. I threw on clothes and boots, my heart pounding with a mixture of fury and anticipation. After weeks of Karen's carefully legal harassment, she'd finally crossed a line that would give me real legal recourse. Trespassing was a crime, not a community planning exercise. I grabbed my own camera, an old digital SLR that I used for documenting ranch operations, and headed outside. Duke trotted beside me, his hackles raised as he sensed the tension in the air. The morning mist was still clinging to the low areas of my pasture, and I could smell the rich scents of damp earth and cattle. My Angus cows were clustered near their water trough, watching the intruders with the mild curiosity that cattle show toward anything unusual in their environment. Karen was about 100 yards into my property, kneeling behind a large boulder to photograph my cattle with a telephoto lens. The silver-haired woman was taking pictures of what looked like the muddy area around the water trough, while the man with the surveying equipment was setting up some kind of measuring device. "Morning, Karen," I called out, loud enough to carry across the pasture. "Nice day for trespassing, isn't it?" All three of them froze like deer caught in headlights. Karen stood up slowly, her camera still in her hands, and I could see her calculating whether to brazen it out or try to retreat. She chose to brazen it out. "Marcus, we're conducting a wildlife survey for the county. Native species documentation. On my private property. Without my permission." At 6:43 in the morning, the silver-haired photographer was already moving toward the fence, clearly wanting no part of whatever conversation was about to unfold. But the man with the surveying equipment seemed rooted to the spot, staring at me like I'd materialized out of thin air. "This is all perfectly legitimate," Karen said, raising her chin with the defiance of someone who'd been caught red-handed, but refused to admit it. "We're documenting the environmental impact of concentrated animal feeding operations on native wildlife habitats." "Concentrated animal feeding operations?" I started laughing, the sound echoing across the pasture and causing several of my cows to look up with interest. "Karen, I've got 40 head of cattle on 120 acres. That's not a CAFO. That's barely a hobby farm by commercial standards. The environmental impact is still significant. The environmental impact of you trespassing on my property is about to be significant too." I raised my camera and started taking pictures, Karen standing in my pasture with her professional photography equipment clearly documented as being on the wrong side of my fence. "You can't photograph us without our permission," the man with the surveying equipment said, apparently unaware of the irony. "Actually, I can. You're trespassing on my property, which makes you criminals. I have every right to document criminal activity occurring on my land." Karen's mask was starting to slip. The carefully maintained suburban composure was cracking, revealing something desperate and vindictive underneath. "This isn't over, Marcus. You think you can just hide behind property rights and keep operating your industrial facility next to a residential community? You think 37 families are just going to accept having their property values destroyed by your cow factory?" "My cow factory?" I took another picture, this one capturing Karen's expression of pure fury. "Is that what you're calling it now? We have rights too. The right to peaceful enjoyment of our properties. The right to clean air and water. The right to a community that maintains reasonable environmental standards. And I have the right not to have people trespassing on my property and harassing my livestock. The sheriff's going to be very interested in these photos, don't you think? That finally broke her resolve. Karen turned and stalked toward the fence, her expensive hiking boots squelching in the soft ground around my water trough. The silver-haired photographer had already reached the fence line and was climbing through, while the man with the surveying equipment was frantically packing up his measuring device. "This isn't over," Karen called back as she reached the fence. "We're going to file complaints with every county department that has jurisdiction over agricultural operations. Environmental protection, health services, zoning enforcement, animal control. We're going to document every violation, every health hazard, every threat to community safety." "You do that," I called back, "and I'll be filing my own complaints, starting with trespassing, harassment, and making false reports to county officials." As the three trespassers retreated to their cars parked along the county road, I stood in my pasture reviewing the photos I'd taken. Clear, high-definition images of Karen Mitchell and her accomplices on my property without permission, carrying professional photography equipment, obviously engaged in some kind of surveillance operation. But more importantly, I had something else now, hours of security camera footage showing their entire trespassing expedition, from the moment they climbed through my fence until they skulked back to their cars like defeated invaders. Karen had just handed me the evidence I needed to turn her harassment campaign against her. What she didn't know was that I was about to use that evidence in a way that would make her the most famous trespasser in 3 counties. The idea came to me that same afternoon, as I was sitting on my porch reviewing the security footage on my laptop. The video was crystal clear Karen climbing through my fence at 6:44 a.m., walking across my pasture with professional photography equipment, taking pictures of my cattle while clearly trespassing on private property. But it wasn't just the trespassing that caught my attention. It was Karen's expression in several of the shots, a look of pure vindictive satisfaction as she photographed what she clearly hoped would be evidence against my operation. She looked like someone who thought they were finally going to win a war they'd been fighting for months. That's when I remembered something that most people in Willowbrook Valley had forgotten. I didn't just own a cattle ranch. Thanks to an investment I'd made 15 years ago, I also owned the most prominent billboard in 3 counties, positioned right on Highway 34, where it curved around Miller's Lake. The billboard was 40 feet tall and 60 feet wide, visible from miles away, and it generated enough rental income each year to pay for my truck insurance. For the past 5 years, it had been leased to a regional bank that used it to advertise their mortgage rates. But that contract was up for renewal in 30 days, and I'd been planning to look for a new client. Instead, I was going to become my own best customer. I spent the weekend working with a graphic designer in Denver, a young woman named Jessica who specialized in large format advertising. When I explained what I wanted to do, she was initially skeptical. "You want to put a photo of someone trespassing on your property on a highway billboard?" Not just someone. The president of the Willowbrook Estates, HOA, who's been harassing me for months, and finally got caught breaking the law on my land. Jessica pulled up the security footage I'd emailed her, studying Karen's face as she crept across my pasture with her camera. "This is definitely trespassing. You've got her clearly on your side of the fence, obviously engaged in unauthorized photography. Can you make it billboard ready?" "Oh, I can make it billboard ready. The question is whether you really want to do this. A billboard like this is going to be seen by thousands of people every day. This woman is going to become famous." That's exactly what I'm hoping for. The design Jessica created was a masterpiece of public shaming. The main image was a crystal-clear shot of Karen in my pasture, her professional camera raised and aimed at my cattle, with the timestamp clearly visible showing 6:47 a.m. Below the photo, in bold letters that could be read from a quarter mile away, was the text, KARENMITC HELLWILLWUBRO OK EST a TASHA2 a PIEASEIDAEA CPSA EEAZERZA rate CHPROPERTY. At the bottom, in smaller but still highly visible text, trespassing is a crime. Harassment of agricultural operations violates Colorado state law. The Billboard company could have the new advertisement installed within 48 hours. All I needed was Karen's written permission to use her likeness in a commercial advertisement, or evidence that she was a public figure engaged in matters of public interest. Given her position as HOA president and her very public campaign against my ranch, the second option was easily satisfied. On Wednesday morning, exactly 1 week after Karen's trespassing expedition, I drove down to Miller's Lake to watch the Billboard installation. The crew worked efficiently, stripping away the bank's mortgage advertisement and replacing it with 40 feet of Karen Mitchell caught in the act of trespassing. The result was spectacular. Karen's face, 20 feet tall and clearly recognizable, stared out over Highway 34 like some kind of wanted poster. The timestamp and location data made it clear that this wasn't some staged photo. This was documentary evidence of criminal activity. I took a photo of the completed billboard and texted it to the same number Karen had used to contact me after the county inspection. Hope you like your new public service announcement. Looking forward to working together on a solution that benefits everyone. MT. Her response came within 5 minutes. You can't do this. This is defamation. This is harassment. I'm calling my lawyer. I texted back, truth is an absolute defense against defamation. And the harassment complaint is rich coming from someone who was caught trespassing on my property to take illegal photographs. The billboard went viral within hours. Someone, probably one of the highway maintenance crews, took a photo and posted it on social media with the caption, "When you mess with the wrong rancher." The image was shared thousands of times, with comments ranging from supportive messages about property rights to jokes about HOA presidents getting their comeuppance. The local newspaper picked up the story by Thursday, running a front-page article titled, "Billboard Exposes HOA President's Trespassing." The reporter interviewed several Willowbrook Estates residents, most of whom claimed they had no idea their HOA president was engaging in illegal surveillance of neighboring properties. But the real impact came on Friday, when I received a call from Sheriff's Deputy Maria Santos, who'd been assigned to investigate my trespassing complaint. "Mr. Thompson, I've reviewed your security footage and the photos you submitted. We're going to be issuing citations for criminal trespass." All three individuals clearly violated Colorado Revised Statute 18-4504. What kind of penalties are we talking about? First offense criminal trespass is typically a fine and community service. But given that this appears to be part of an ongoing harassment campaign, we're also recommending that the district attorney review the case for potential stalking charges. By Sunday, Karen Mitchell had resigned as president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Her resignation letter, which was leaked to the same Facebook group where she'd posted her photos of my cattle, cited personal reasons and unforeseen circumstances that made it impossible for her to continue serving the community. The billboard stayed up for the full month I'd contracted for, visible to every commuter who traveled Highway 34. Karen's face became so recognizable that people started calling it the Trespasser Billboard, and I received dozens of calls from other ranchers and farmers who'd been dealing with similar harassment from suburban neighbors. But the most satisfying moment came 3 weeks later, when I received a formal letter from the new HOA president, a retired teacher named Margaret Walsh, who'd been elected in an emergency meeting. The letter was brief and to the point. The Willowbrook Estates HOA was withdrawing all complaints against my operation and formally recognizing my ranch's right to continue operating as it had for over a century. 6 months later, Karen Mitchell's house went on the market. The listing described it as a custom home with panoramic views of authentic Colorado ranch land, apparently hoping that new buyers would see my cattle operation as a selling point rather than a problem. The irony wasn't lost on me. After spending months trying to drive me away to protect her property values, Karen had ended up destroying her own property value through her illegal harassment campaign. The Billboard had made her the most famous trespasser in Colorado, and her resignation from the HOA had left her with no local political power to wield against neighbors she didn't like. The new HOA president, Margaret Walsh, stopped by my ranch in early spring to introduce herself and assure me that the board had no interest in continuing Karen's war against agricultural operations. Actually, Margaret said as we stood by my fence, watching my cattle graze in the morning sunshine, several of our residents have mentioned how much they enjoy having working ranch land next to the community. It gives the area authentic character. Well, Mrs. Walsh, we're not going anywhere. My family's been ranching this valley for over a century, and we plan to be here for another century. That's exactly what we're hoping for, Mr. Thompson. Exactly what we're hoping for. The Billboard contract expired, but I kept the advertisement stored in my barn as a reminder of what can happen when suburban busybodies forget that some battles aren't worth fighting. Every time I looked at that 20-foot-tall photo of Karen trespassing in my pasture, I couldn't help but smile. I also kept the security camera system because you never know when someone else might decide that a working ranch doesn't belong next to their vision of suburban perfection. As I sit here now, watching another Colorado sunrise paint my pastures gold while my cattle start their daily routine of grazing and lounging in the morning warmth, I can't help but reflect on the lessons learned from Karen Mitchell's failed campaign to drive me off my own land. She taught me that some people will go to extraordinary lengths to control their neighbors, even when those neighbors were there first and aren't bothering anyone. She taught me that documentation is everything when dealing with harassment, and that security cameras are worth every penny when you're dealing with trespassers who think they're above the law. But most importantly, she taught me that sometimes the best response to a public attack is an even more public defense. Karen wanted to use social media and community pressure to shame me off my land. Instead, she ended up becoming a highway-sized example of what happens when you trespass on the wrong rancher's property. The Billboard may be gone, but the lesson remains: if you're going to pick a fight with someone, make sure you know what weapons they have at their disposal. In Karen's case, she picked a fight with someone who owned the biggest billboard in 3 counties and wasn't afraid to use it.